The sitting is resumed. Army leader government business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise, Mr. Speaker, to lend my voice to this debate, but also to support this bill which has been led by the Honourable Attorney General and member for St. Joseph. And at the outset, Mr. Speaker, I want to say that this is a very serious debate that we are having. I know that what was displayed in the morning session of this House does not represent the full seriousness of this piece of legislation. We were subjected by the Leader of the Opposition and certainly to members on this side, to the taunting of the introduction of this bill, to the Honourable Member for Christchurch East. I sat there, sir, wondering if the Honourable Leader of the Opposition had collided in any way with the seriousness of crime in this country. And I know that while he is an attorney at law and very familiar with the criminal courts, it was worrisome that even as a politician and one who represents a constituency, that the serious nature of what this country is facing in relation to violence and violent crimes, and in particular firearm offenses and the offenses of murder, seemed to have escaped his understanding and his explanation to the public of whether he supported or he did not support this piece of legislation. Mr. Speaker, I come today from a place that is perhaps a little different from most of my colleagues. At the age of, I think it was about 16, I remember going with my father into the constituency of St. Michael's South East. There was a murder that took place at the Hole in the Wall canteen in Golden Rock. I'm sure you remember, Mr. Speaker. At that very tender age, not that I had not been exposed to things of violence before, but it was then that I understood very clearly the impact that persons falling victim in these situations would have on communities. You know, you turn up on the scene, you're trying to console the deceased family, you're trying to also deal with certainly the perpetrator's family at times. You are trying to keep a community together who obviously is living in fear of whether there are going to be repercussions. And it was very clear to me at that time, Mr. Speaker, and it has continued to be very clear to me, that the issue of crime is not something that we can play politics with. I recall in 1996, my colleague in the other place, John King, came up with a song called How Many More? I find myself, as now the representative for St. Michael's South East, burying several of the people, not just constituents, because these, I always refer to them as my family, but I say these are the people that I have grown up with, people who I've interacted with, and I find myself attending many, many funerals of young men being slain in my constituency. It pains me, Mr. Speaker, and there are only so many opportunities that you can get to say, I am sorry to a mother that has lost her child, or that you can explain to a community that government is trying its best to do all that it can within its power to be able to bring about law and order. There are only so many words that you can have to express and to certainly feel the pain that people are feeling in terms of living in fear, especially our elderly within communities. And each of the examples that have been given by both of the other members who spoke on this side spoke to communities being outraged by violent behavior, by the fact that people are living in fear, that people become prisoners in their own homes and within their own communities as a result of these types of crimes. And that the public then calls on us as representatives, as leaders in government, to be able to respond appropriately, to put in place measures that will be able to combat the fears that they are having within their various communities. If you take what John King sang in 1996 and you look at what is happening in 2024, and even if you go back to when the last administration was in power, there's nothing new happening under the sun right now. There has always been episodes of violent crimes and also firearm offenses taking place. And I do not know on what lawful authority any leader of the opposition or anybody on the opposition side can come to this chamber and attack this administration, attack legislation where we are trying our best to grapple with these types of offenses and making sure that people are not allowed to get back out on the street after committing these types of crimes. I don't know how they can do so when it was under that administration, Mr. Speaker, that the scanners in the port were not working. Which means that we all know that if the fellas in the block, in the plane, can't be bringing in the guns into this country. They gotta be coming in somewhere by somebody who's able, in a position to be able to import these things into the country. And if for a period of time under the last administration, scanners were not working, God only knows what was coming into this country, as we are now seeing not only firearms and stuff, but we are seeing all kinds of high-powered ammunition and rifles being used to carry out serious crimes in this country. No administration that was in office that presided over that situation can honestly come here to this chamber and lead a debate to talk about how this piece of legislation that we have brought still needs work to be done on it. I don't know, Mr. Speaker, what I can say to the mother recently who lost her son, raised her son well, had no issues with him before the law courts, made sure that he didn't get into any issues with anybody within the community, sent him off to work, did her best to be able to raise him. And 4 gunmen come through the area in the Pine, and in the presence, in broad daylight, riddled him with bullets and others who were nearby. I don't know how, Mr. Speaker, as a representative of a community that sees these types of acts taking place, where mothers are losing their children senselessly, that I can take a position that I can't support this legislation that is before this House today, sir. Because I, like many others, recognize that we have to do something as an administration. This is not the silver bullet to solving crime, and I want to make it clear, this does not solve the crimes in Barbados from being committed. This is but one pill, one solution to being able to send a very strong message that this administration is very intolerant of the acts of criminal activity taking place across this country. I don't know what to tell the mother of the child. Sir, I came up at Erdeston Primary watching a young man at the corner by Pine Road called the Nut Man, selling nuts. As a young man, I watched his locks grow to the ground, raising his children and making an honest living, sir, and growing his business, and watching him killed by a stray bullet, a bullet not intended for him. And again, another mother holding her belly and bawling, and a family completely disrupted because of the loss of life, sir. It is painful when we reduce these types of debates to, according to the Honourable Member for Christchurch South, an academic discussion. When we reduce it to philosophical underpinnings, as if lives do not matter, as though we do not have a responsibility to those mothers who have lost their children and to those children who are growing up without their parents in our communities, to do something to be able to arrest the lawlessness that is creating havoc across all this entire island. I don't know how we can come and we can try to move a comma from one location or change something from must to may and trivialize a debate on the loss of lives, innocent lives in some cases. because we represent people in a court of law, sir, because we make money from defending persons. Mr. Speaker, I know you know better, and I've said it to you as well. I have practiced at the criminal bar as well. But I can never put being an attorney before my understanding of what I see on a day-to-day basis of guns in my community and across this country wreaking havoc in lives and livelihoods across this country. I can't do it. This legislation, as I said, is not the silver bullet, but it is a start for us to be able to wrestle to the ground persons who believe that basically the courts ain't doing enough, that they know that they can kill somebody and they can get out on bail the next week, that they can commit 2 and 3 murders, but they will still be able to get an attorney to go and defend them and say that in the name of human rights, they must be entitled to be able to get bail. Mr. Speaker, this is not to infringe on the rights of the individual to a fair trial. Quite the opposite. This legislation is here to allow us to be able to ensure that what, in a sense, is the horse that has bolted, that we are able to put the horse back in the stable, that we are able to give the courts clear guidelines as to how to help it to make certain decisions in relation to the accused. It gives the accused the opportunity through his attorney, if he so wishes, to be able to indicate to the court why he feels he should and should not get bail. But perhaps the most telling thing in this legislation is the fact that the interest of justice must prevail. And the question is, whose justice are we talking about? Because the mother whose child has been killed by the stray bullet must be entitled to some level of justice as well. Is there no justice for that mother? Is there no justice, no interest of justice that the court must take into account when an entire community cannot sleep at night? When even with police outposts in communities where some of these people live across the road from the police outpost, their children are getting gunned down. And we want to come and make sport about the bail legislation, Mr. Speaker. What do you tell those families that are going crazy when the night comes, when they hear a bullet, a gunshot in their communities, thinking that the next bullet may be for them or the children that are left behind, sir? You know, Mr. Speaker, I speak from a place of a lot of hurt, because sometimes I feel that even as a representative, even with all the work that I do within my community, all the young people that I try to save, Mr. Speaker, sometimes we've got to lose a couple. And it's hurt like hell. And if it is that this administration takes a position that we must bring legislation to tighten the laws, then I support this administration doing what is necessary to do it. But I'm not going to stop on this legislation because this is just the first phase. I want to go back a little bit because as former Minister of Education, I can tell you, children don't start to be bad when they come before the courts, when they take up the gun and they shoot somebody. We all see the signs and the symptoms from the time the children are at the youngest age. And we live in a society now where people want to turn a blind eye, where they don't want to see what is unfolding in front of them. They don't want to tell about the children nothing. Mr. Speaker, this debate is deeper than the law. This debate is a reflection of what is happening in our society. And we need to check ourselves and recognize that we are losing our young men. We are losing our future generations of men. And each of us have a responsibility to do all that we can when the issues are raised within the school system, when children are on the radar from the youngest age, to ensure that the interventions are there, that the parents have places to go where they know that they can intervene to make sure that the children get the assistance that is required, Mr. Speaker. That we have enough of the safety officers and the social workers and the psychologists within the schools to be able to allow the interventions to take place. Because you know what, Mr. Speaker, sometimes the parents themselves do not know what they do not know. And sometimes they need the additional help to be able to tell them what they need to do in order to get the support for their children. You will often hear children tell you, or parents tell you that they know the children bad, the children behaving badly, but they don't know what to do with them. But when they end up killing somebody, all of a sudden, you hear everything coming about how difficult the child was at school, how the child wasn't learning. These are some of the reasons why we have said as a government that we must bring about education transformation. That the reforms that are necessary, where instead of having children falling through the cracks, that we pull them out at the earliest age and make sure that we are able to do the interventions that are necessary. Because the statistics are there. I am no big fan of the statistics because I live it every day. But the statistics are there to show that a number of the children, the young people who are getting involved in crime have attended the same secondary schools. And Mr. Speaker, the statistics are not lying. The children are having challenges with numeracy. They are having challenges with literacy, Mr. Speaker. And that is why we have said that when the last administration could ignore these things, that this administration cannot do so, Mr. Speaker. Because we are now reversing a lot of the things that have been done, which have resulted in a lack of progress for an entire generation. So the scanners was only one part of it. The removal of the testing of our children for the hearing and the sight and the psychological interventions, all of those things happened under the last administration, Mr. Speaker. But they want to come in here and behave as though life started under this Barbados Labour Party administration. I want to make it abundantly clear that education and education reform has a major part to do with what we're talking about today. This is society's problem. This is not the Attorney General's problem. It is not the police problem. People need to start talking about what is happening within their communities. And I see that the Barbados Police Service has now started to, I would say, get up to the time in terms of its post on a Monday for criminals across the country, asking the public to be able to provide information and calling for those persons to come in. They are following what is happening in Trinidad and Jamaica, where again the statistics for murder rates and firearm offenses are out of control. But what I like about it is that the police are actually now thanking the people who come forward and provide information. They are capturing the persons who they need to, but they are thanking the people who are coming forward. And we have to develop a culture where we don't wait until we lose people to speak up and to say that something is wrong, Mr. Speaker. Because we are developing a culture where nobody don't want to talk. Nobody don't want to say nothing. They will say it to you quietly, but they don't want to speak up and say who is carrying the guns within the community. They won't want to speak about the guns that may be hidden within their own households. And I'm saying to this country that we can do better as a society. It is not too late to be able to reverse the hands of time. The Bail Act is only one part of the solution, but it is not the only solution to the problem. We can put as many judges as we want into the court system. And I agree that we may need to put additional staff in to support the judges to get the cases through. But my bigger concern isn't what's happening in the system alone. It is what's happening before these children get to the system. We see it in the juvenile courts. When I used to practice, I did a lot of matters for juveniles because I was always very concerned about what was happening in the early stages and what interventions we could do for young people when they found themselves before the courts of law, Mr. Speaker. And one of the things that always has bothered me is that our young people do not see consequences anymore. They do not take responsibility for the consequences of their actions. And this has a large part to do with the difficulties that we are seeing developing across the country. The influences of music have crept in. Nobody don't want to snitch because stitches is for snitches. And these types of messages are permeating across the country, across the culture, the subcultures that we have, where our young people are hearing these messages and coming to believe that these things are okay. When we were growing up, we were told, you better talk. You better open up your mouth and talk, otherwise everybody can be in trouble. But you know, I'm not comfortable with corporal punishment, but I believe that there is still ways to talk to young people to explain to them right from wrong. And y'all know my position on that. I have no difficulty in my community talking to young people. I don't have to hit nobody child. I don't have to encourage no parent to hit nobody child. But you show children love and you listen to the things that children are saying, because you will be amazed at the things that you hear when you listen to what the youngest of children are saying, not only about how they feel, but about the things that are happening within their households. Children are not stupid. Children understand what is happening in terms of our culture, in terms of our drug culture, our gun culture. Even in terms of the music, they understand what is happening. And Mr. Speaker, I come from a background of being involved in entertainment. You know the difference in terms of me and many other young people? I used to hear the music when I was young. I used to enjoy the songs, what we would call the gun tunes, and all of these other tunes, Mr. Speaker. But I had a different upbringing, where I understood that that was music. And unless you have positive influences explaining to young people the difference between music and lyrics, and what they must differentiate between right and wrong, those who don't know better will oftentimes be telling these young people that these things they must internalize and they must do. And therefore we have a responsibility as much as we can. We can't protect them from everything. But there's nothing wrong if you are explaining to children what the lyrics are saying and explaining to them what is right from what is wrong. We have stopped explaining to our youth these differences. And we are often critical of them for what they are doing and what they're getting involved in. And when they come before the courts, but many times you should ask yourself, what have you done in terms of your interventions before they get to the court system? The other issue, Mr. Speaker, is that while we have to focus on what we're doing today and why we have to look at what is happening in terms of the children coming up, we also need to look at the young people who are going to jail. And what are we doing in terms of the rehabilitation of offenders within the criminal justice system, sir? Because I see a trend that is developing. I have a lot of young men who have gone to prison. A lot of them come out of prison after we commit firearm offenses, murder charges. They come out and they're looking for work. And there's limited work opportunities that many of them are able to find themselves gainfully employed in. That's a fact. Many of us in the constituencies, when we try to send people to be able to get employment, we are challenged when they have a criminal record, especially if it is for violent offenses. In many of the programs, we've sent persons to who have had records. Again, there is a trend developing where you are never sure whether they're going to get into conflict situations with other people who have records on the job sites. And this is a reality that many of us face when we make the recommendations for persons to be able to seek out employment who have had criminal convictions. It therefore means, Mr. Speaker, that we have to do a little bit more, I believe, in being able to reform and rehabilitate persons when they go to prison. We need more programs than what we certainly have now to be able to help people to transition when they do come out of prison. Because they're coming back into society. They're going to come back into communities. They have to come back into households. And therefore, we cannot see this legislation in terms of having persons now having to prove why they should have bail, and in many cases, they probably may not get the bail. When they go to prison, whenever they come back out, the reality is, unless we are seeking to reform and to rehabilitate them while they are there, or to offer some level of support to help them to transition, they will continue to be a problem within our society and to wreak havoc in our communities, Mr. Speaker. These are the real issues that this country is facing. And we need to be able to speak openly and frontally to these things. There are too many young men who come out of prison who do not know how they're going to find employment. They have not been guided on anger management. They go from 0 to 100 when somebody tries to explain something to them. Mr. Speaker, you know it, you've represented them. And I'm sure you've had your own difficulties trying to explain to them the process of the law and what the judge is doing. I deal with it every day. And that's why I say that the problem is not just us tightening legislation. We have to look at what we do before, but we also have to look at reform and rehabilitation of our offenders in a serious way. Otherwise, we will simply be locking up people's children as opposed to rehabilitating them and being able to allow them to live and work and be productive citizens. These are the concerns that I carry on my shoulder every day. I feel like it is a burden trying to find things for our young people who have criminal records to be able to do, Mr. Speaker. You try, but you have if the programs are not there to allow them to equip themselves with the necessary skills to be able to live productive lives, all you can do is send them for the job. And therefore, we have to get serious about these things. I remember, you know, a lot of the weight that these young people carry nowadays, a lot of our children are also exposed to grief. We did a study a couple of years ago when we had all the violence going on inside of the schools. And it showed that there were a number of young people who were dealing with issues of persons who they had seen either gunned down within their communities. They are familiar with victims of violent crimes. And in turn, they never get the opportunity to deal with the emotion that takes them over as a result of losing loved ones. Because we also have a phenomenon in very close-knit communities where the children and the adults are in the same place when somebody gets killed and discussing all of these issues as though, you know, they are big adults. We have a serious phenomenon where people do not anymore separate what should be conversations for little children and what should be conversations for big hardback adults. And I appeal to parents, you know, this is not about blame. I appeal to parents that if you don't know what to do, you need to put up your hand and find somebody who can assist in helping you with your children and helping you to be better parents. This is not about blaming anybody for raising children that come before the criminal justice system, Mr. Speaker. Because with all of the best intentions, sometimes children just sometimes end up deviant. That's just a fact of life. But we can't disregard the statistics of what we are seeing either. That a number of the children who get kicked out of school, a number of the children who we know have challenges within the system with reading and writing and literacy, that many of those children end up being the same children who are before the criminal courts. And who the subject of this legislation today is also intended to deal with. And therefore, we have to see this thing in a holistic way. This cannot be seen in a vacuum. The interest of justice under this legislation is a critical part of what we are doing today. Interest of justice is the justice for the accused, but it is also for the people who survive. It is also for the people who are in communities who are impacted by violent crimes. And we cannot pretend any longer that this is not impacting this entire country and people across our communities, Mr. Speaker. No matter which community I go into, the issue of violent crime is on the tips of people's tongues. The issue of guns is on the tips of people's tongues. I believe if you live by the sword, you can die by the sword. But what I don't believe is that if you have lived a good life and you have done all you have done to raise your children within your community, your children should not be dying by the sword. What comes home to me on many occasions is that I heard the honourable member say that this is not close to our heart and this is not anything that any of us in here are affected by. But I know that he is not a man that goes into the communities the way I do. So I can only speak for myself. I get nervous, Mr. Speaker, about the fact that I journey into my communities in a very free way. I always have. I've grown up in them. So I feel as though I am at home. I can park my car anywhere in St. Michael's Southeast and get up and walk and go and open somebody's door and go in. But in each of the places where there has been gun violence in recent times are all places that this minister, that this representative does go. All areas where I stand up, I go online by the parks, I go online outside people's houses, I go in the same people's houses. And you know what gets chilling? Is that I don't want it to be a politician that get killed for people to wake up and realize that we gotta take action. I don't want it to be any of us who loses a child by gun violence that all of a sudden makes everybody realize that we gotta do something and act quickly. Because we are losing the lives of innocent people, the people that we represent. And it therefore means that if we're losing the lives of the people we represent, if you're a good representative, at any point it could be your life. Because a lot of these young people do not care who is in the vicinity of the bullet. They do not care. You could have raised them or not raised them. You could have looked out for them when they were young. It don't matter. When they come with the gun into a community, they're shooting at whoever is there. And there are just too many unintended victims that are the result of these types of acts, Mr. Speaker. I support this legislation. I support the fact that the legislation gives the guidance to not only the accused, but certainly gives clarity and certainly gives the judges the opportunity to give reasons for their decision. That is important. I am not minded to agree with the Honourable Member for Christchurch South that this is apartheid law. You know, I sat here and I laughed because, I mean, it is such a desperate attempt to get a headline. And it is unfortunate coming from somebody of such standing that you would trivialize the attempts by this administration to look to other jurisdictions where they have had to deal with violent crimes and deal with rising statistics amongst young people falling victim to senseless killings, to be able to introduce legislation that can not only balance the rights of the accused, but also give some comfort to societies and communities that you're doing something to bring some sense of normalcy back to life as we used to know it. This is not an apartheid law, and I want to make that abundantly clear. Those who understand what Nelson Mandela went through and what, when he came out of prison, he made the point that South Africa could never be a place anymore where you have discrimination of persons. And South Africa, I believe, was even one of the first places to make sure that, you know, people were not discriminated on the basis of homosexuality and gender, because they understood what those things do. They have strived to try to bring balance to a society that created an imbalance where people could not, because of the color of their skin, be entitled to certain basic human rights. And the Honourable Leader of the Opposition wants to trivialize the reference to the South African legislation as though we just pick it up from somewhere on the streets and pull it together and said, here, to the people of Barbados. Mr. Speaker, it is disgusting. And I really, you know, the true, you know, he talked about gangs and anti-gang legislation. Mr. Speaker, I'll speak a little bit about that quickly. Because I have listened to the solutions offered up by the Honourable Leader of the Opposition. And they're not much different from what the previous administration used to recommend, you know. You know, people accuse the Prime Minister, they accuse myself and others on this side of mixing with all kinds of people. Well, I'm gonna mix with them till the day I dead. Because it is the only way to save a generation of people from themselves sometimes. To be there, to be leadership within communities where there is no leadership, sir. And I will never stop being true to myself or encouraging any of my colleagues to be true to themselves in being able to lift up people from where they are and show them positive role models within communities. I will never stop doing it. But he is speaking of a tone where you know, you go after people, or you go after people who associate with people who are involved in criminal activity. Forgetting that even within his own bosom, he got some of the same people doing the same thing. So I don't quite understand. The former leadership of the Democratic Labour Party mixed with everybody. But all of a sudden, no, it is not good for the Barbados Labour Party members to mix with all of the people that it represents, every demographic. Because you mix does not mean you condone. Sometimes you are able to turn people around and the decisions that they are intending to make because of the interventions that you make and the way that you try to get into their heads to understand why they think and why they do the things that they do, sir. Doesn't make me a criminal, doesn't make any of us a criminal. But sometimes the reasoned conversation makes the difference in helping people to determine whether they do right or whether they do wrong. And I will never stop the mixing with people. I don't care what they have done, sir. I will mix with them if it means that I can get a better Barbados and a better community out of what I live in and the only place that I know. But what we must never do is be reactive. So he talks about anti-gang legislation. You know, the only gangs that I know about right now exist within the Democratic Labour Party. Because they got about 10 gangs inside the Democratic Labour Party vying for the leadership of the political party. I get all kinds of messages coming to my phone of all kinds of rife and strife going on across on the other side, sir. You need to understand where the true gangs are. We are doing what we can to deal with criminal activity in this country, and we are not trivializing it. The Democratic Labour Party and its leadership needs to do the same. You do not set examples by the type of behavior being exhibited in the halls of Parliament. You do not set examples by people trying to break locks and climb through windows and put people in court. That's not how you lead, sir. You lead by example. You lead by doing the programs and doing the things and strengthening the laws to be able to make sure that people can breathe a little easier. You can't solve everything. But it is these types of attempts that we are making, and I hope that the public understands what we are doing here today and does not get distracted by the leader of the opposition, who seeks only to distract. Up to now, I still don't know whether he has supported or objected. I know he's not here and he probably will not vote on this particular legislation. And it is clear to me that he clearly does not even understand the procedure in relation to when it comes to the vote. But so long as I am in this place, Mr. Speaker, I want to make it clear there is a procedure. I sat on the other side and I was disgusted by the way in which the leadership of the then administration spoke to each other. And I am continuing today to be disgusted by the way in which the leadership of the Democratic Labour Party is attempting to speak to us. And it would seem even to some of the women within the Democratic Labour Party, because there's another letter circulating about that as well. But we are here to ensure that incidents like what happened with the campus trends and others do not repeat itself, where the public does not question whether we are serious or whether the courts are serious about justice. Justice must be seen to be done. And I don't want to experience another crop over where 2 feet away from where we are linemen, Prime Minister, all of us are linemen. Somebody gets gunned down. Crop over day, a day that is supposed to be enjoyment and revelry and a celebration of our emancipation and the cutting of canes. And people trying to kill each other, sir. I don't want to live in that Barbados. And I don't want to be living in a Barbados where I feel that we cannot make a difference by being able to bring on to strengthen legislation. If the matter gets struck down, again, at least this administration has shown that it is prepared to do something in the interim to combat crime. You heard the Honourable Attorney General. People will bring constitutional motions from time to time. That is their right. But this government has a right as well to protect the people of this country and to make sure that we put the interventions in place and the laws in place that people may think twice about what they are going to do, sir. That is what this legislation is about. And I therefore urge unlike the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, that people read the legislation and understand it. Because it must not be that it is easy to get bail in this country. If you believe you are entitled to bail, you must be able to show why you should get bail. It is that simple. And it should not be a situation where this now turns that we are going after the accused. As I said from the outset, there are victims and communities that are equally suffering, that we need to appreciate and understand that justice has to be done in relation to those individuals as well. You can't bring back anybody when they're gone, but you can certainly correct the hands of time in terms of what has transpired prior to this legislation being passed. I hope that in the other place, Mr. Speaker, as I close, that what I've heard over the last few days in terms of notice being given in relation to this legislation does not become a major issue. I hope that people are reasoned in the positions that they take in relation to this legislation. For those who don't represent communities, you may not understand what each of us who represent ordinary people are facing and what we are seeing. For those who don't go before the criminal courts, you may never have collided with it. But I ask you to trust us that in bringing this legislation in such an urgent way, Prime Minister only spoke about this a few weeks ago, the Attorney General and the drafters have worked through the night to be able to get this legislation before this chamber. The notice that was given is not particularly unusual. We've told the other side, both written to the Leader of the Opposition, informed him what we intended to do today in all its stages. The Honourable Leader in the other place did the exact same thing. Communicated with the independent senators, government senators, and opposition senators, and indicated that while it had not passed the House, that it would be debated in all its stages once it passed in this place today, sir. There is nothing untoward. There may be newcomers to the House of Parliament, but I can tell them when I sat in the other place, you must always be prepared to debate legislation on the order paper. And when the courtesy is given to you as a member of the opposition to be told that a bill is to be debated, you just need to go and read it and put your views on the table. But what we cannot do is send mixed messages that we want the government to be tough on crime, we want the police to be able to get out there and do their job, but at the same time that we owe in an eye, we ensure we one foot in and one foot out. We can't send mixed messages to the electorate. Mr. Speaker, I think I have said enough in terms of a different perspective. As I said, I don't intend to do more than to support this legislation and to give a different perspective than what I think was exhibited by the Leader of the Opposition today, from a perspective where I spend a lot of time on the ground, a lot more than he does, sir, and therefore my collision with the realities of what is happening is completely different. I want to applaud the Honourable Attorney General and the drafters for the efforts made in the shortest space of time to be able to turn this around. If there are imperfections, we are an administration that is very quick to correct whatever it is that is highlighted. So I don't think if there's problems on this occasion, we can correct them. But the one thing we will not do is to back down from a position which gives comfort to a number of households across Barbados that this administration is doing its level best to be able to combat criminal activity in this country. I'm obliged, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for St. Peter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise to add my voice to the debate on this bill before the Honourable Chamber, the bail bill. This morning's proceedings I found initially interesting, then disturbing. Let me begin by saying that I made this intervention in the name of somebody who I grew up knowing, who I've had many conversations with, who was close to my sister, myself, whose mother was very close to my mother, and who lost his life attempting to stop a robbery from taking place just about 30 or 40 meters from my house. I made this intervention in the name of Newton Lewis. Every citizen, Mr. Speaker, has the right to be able to live in a safe environment. Every citizen, every resident, not just every citizen, but every resident of a country must be able to go about his or her business, believing that when they leave home, they'll get back home safely, believing that they're not going to be victim of a stray bullet. And I'll say to you that on the night, that Saturday night, etched in my mind, I heard the gunshots, and then I heard the screaming. On that Saturday night, the place where I grew up had a bullet hole through the glass. A resident of a country ought not to be living in fear. The role of a government is to create the environment that allows its citizens to be able to live, to be able to recreate, to be able to develop themselves in a space that they feel is secure, in a space that is conducive to social interaction, conducive to mental peace, tranquility when that is required. A government's role is to ensure that a society does not descend into anarchy. And a government does that by developing policy, and out of that policy, developing legislation, enacting legislation that allows for the good governance of a country, that allows for people to operate safely in a country. And every intervention I make in this honorable chamber, Mr. Speaker, I have used and will continue to use this matter of people-centeredness, because that's what this government is about. This government views human beings as people. And in this regard, we're talking about people who need to be protected. Now, we refer to rights, and there's all kinds of discussion. But I say to you, Mr. Speaker, that this government will not step back from its obligation to ensure that all persons living on this rock can live in a safe environment. We will not step back. If it is that we are challenged, we will do what we have done today. We will sit, caucus, consult, and determine how we will move forward with maybe an amended approach, a different approach, but all with the view and with the aim of ensuring that our societies are safe. Crime has many, many impacts on people and on societies. Their physical impacts. Newton lost his life. People lose limbs. People lose some of their senses. And by senses, I'm talking about the 5 senses. I'm not referring to what some people believe has happened to the now leader, honorable leader of the opposition. I'm talking about the 5 senses. It causes physical impacts. There is also, Mr. Speaker, these psychological impacts. My daughter tells me that stress is a killer. The fear of crime produces stress. Not just crime, but the fear of crime produces stress. This government understands that. That is why we are here today. That is why we are debating this bill in this honorable chamber today. And that is why we are going to go through it in all of its stages today. Because we understand that crime and the fear of crime produces a stress that negatively and in a lot of cases severely impacts members of the population. We are also aware, Mr. Speaker, that there are social impacts. So I'm not going to trivialize the conversation by talking about people driving the long way. But there are social implications. Some people don't feel like going into certain places because of the fear of crime. People not congregating in the same way because of the fear of crime. These are real, and Mr. Speaker, these are recognized by us in government. We interact with people. We sometimes ourselves may suffer some of these impacts. We are aware. That is why we are here. That is why we are debating this bill today. And that is why we'll go through it in all of its stages today. Because we are concerned about the people of this country. There are also, Mr. Speaker, and I think the Honourable Member for St. Joseph touched on this, there are economic impacts of crime and there are economic impacts of the fear of crime. These are not to be overlooked. They're not to be minimized. Investors include in their deliberation about where to put their funds. One of the considerations that they use is how stable a society is. If there's criminal activity, well, in all societies, there's criminal activity. I often remind good people. I think I had to share this with my father. My father, Mr. Speaker, did not believe in television. He thought it was the source of much evil. But even more than that, he thought it was the creator of a lot of laziness among people. But I had to share with him, when I had passed the age of getting the lashes that he would administer, that Cain did not watch any TV. He certainly had never seen anybody commit a crime. There was nothing on Instagram when he did his dastardly deed. I believe, Mr. Speaker, that, like the Bible says, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. You don't have to learn wickedness. It happens almost naturally. But some people go to the extreme. And I say to you that those who want to invest take crime into consideration, even though there's crime everywhere. Those who want to travel to our country, and we exist in a country that is dependent on tourism. The Honourable Member for St. Michael West Central will tell you that tourism pays the bills. People also make decisions on traveling based on crime, perceptions of crime, or fear of crime. Even though where some of our visitors come from, there is a rampant crime. But we understand that a person who leaves home to go on holiday sometimes is leaving home to get away from the situation that they're spending the next maybe 50 weeks or 49 weeks or 51 weeks in. And so these things we understand impact. Mr. Speaker, because we are clear as to how crime, perceptions of crime, and the fear of crime impact, this Barbados Labour Party, in government and in opposition, has always been careful about how we speak publicly about crime. We do not, have not, and will not use crime to scaremonger, because we recognize that that may be good for a headline, but that headline goes back in a diplomatic pouch to a capital somewhere in the world. And that headline and the story that comes with it could end up with a travel advisory. And so, Mr. Speaker, I say to you, and I want to encourage George Street, in all of its confusion and contortion, not to use crime as a political tool. The implications are too significant for our country. We will never run a campaign on crime and violence. We recognize these things as scourges that need to be addressed. That is why we're here today. And that is why we're debating this bill today. We came into government, Mr. Speaker, and you've heard this repeated a number of times. My colleague from Christchurch East spoke about reading the standing orders. I read them too, and I know it speaks to repetition. But I have to tell you, Mr. Speaker, and I have to crave your indulgence. I have to hope you do not put the marshals on standby for me. But I have to say, even in defiance of the standing orders, I have to repeat in this honorable chamber that we came to office and found out that there were no scanners working. The public has to remember that the same people who are talking about all the crime that is going on in the country, who make it seem as though we are living in some place where that you can't step out of your house. They give the impression that there are angels come down from somewhere. They left government not just in economic shambles, because they did. They left government not just owing Barbadians millions and millions of dollars. We call it adverse financing. They left government not just after 23 downgrades, but they left government unattended at our ports of entry. They left government without functioning scanners. And containers are coming into this country, barrels are coming into this country every day. But they believe that they can not have functioning scanners at the port. And then we'll want to wonder, how come there's so many guns? How come there's so much ammunition? The Democratic Labour Party bears much of the responsibility for where we are today. But this Barbados Labour Party does not spend all of its time focusing on the disaster that is the Democratic Labour Party. We know that we have to take action to address any problem that we confront in this country. Crime is but one of those issues. We've had to deal with sewerage on the street, where people could not commit some crimes because they got to make sure they don't walk in jobby. We've had to deal with the issues, so there are no scanners functioning at the port. There are no scanners functioning at the port. We came in, we found two judges in the criminal court. I almost said two criminal judges, but my English teachers at secondary school would have chastised me for that. We found two judges operating in the criminal courts. That is what we found. There is crime, and a party that came into government some time ago on a platform of crime and violence left government, voted out as they were by the people of this country, left government with two judges operating in the criminal courts. And Barbadians wonder why there's a pileup of cases. Two judges. We now have 8. Mr. Speaker, that is a fourfold increase. A fourfold increase in the number of judges in the criminal courts. The Barbados Labour Party in government has functioning scanners, has 8 judges in the criminal court instead of 2, while in a program with the International Monetary Fund. That is the importance that we place on matters that affect our people. That is how we govern, Mr. Speaker. It is called people-centered governance. I heard the Honourable Member for Christchurch South today speak about the Barbados Police Service. I think it is a horrible thing to try to use what is happening in Barbados today to get the votes of decent, patriotic, committed members of the Barbados Police Service. I don't think decent people go in that direction. I have to say to you, Mr. Speaker, that we came into office and found a demoralized then Royal Barbados Police Force. We came into office, Mr. Speaker, after the last government appointed someone who felt aggrieved while in the service, while in the force, appointed that person to be in a position to make decisions that affected the leadership of the Royal Barbados Police Force. Now, Mr. Speaker, if that is not terrible governance, then I do not know what is. But the Royal Barbados Police Force at that time suffered the consequences of having an aggrieved person now in a position to be able to make or annul decisions made by the leadership of the Royal Barbados Police Force. That is what we came into office to find. And we have tried our best to put policies in place to address the organization so that we raise the morale of the members, hard-working members of the No Barbados Police Service. We believe that the officers who have committed themselves to reassure and to serve and to protect need our support. And Mr. Speaker, this government has been giving them our support. I said on Brass Tacks just maybe 3 weeks ago that one of those interventions has been to address the matter of affordable housing for persons, including members of the Barbados Police Service. That is not the panacea, but that is just one example of what this government has been doing for members of the Barbados Police Service. And we continue to recognize their importance in the process of restoring order and safety to this country. We came into office and found, I mentioned 23 downgrades, a contracting economy, and I will say to you, Mr. Speaker, what you already know as a trained and certified social worker, that criminal activity has causes. There are causes for much of the criminal activity. And one of those causes is unemployment. We came into office after a government that ran us almost into the ground had suffered 23 downgrades, where businesses were moving their headquarters, where unemployment was rising, where the leader of the country said that in spite of those downgrades, nobody can downgrade Barbados. A level of silliness or ignorance, maybe it was ignorance rather than silliness, a level of ignorance that I had not seen for a long time before that. Because with every downgrade, Mr. Speaker, the risk, and this is now not security risk, this is business risk. With every downgrade, the business risk associated with that downgrade manifests itself in increased interest rates. So that with all the downgrades that Barbados had suffered, that our economy has suffered, the interest rates that businesses have to pay as they engage with banks goes up. Because when the banks assess risk, it is not just the business plan that the business provides to the bank. Part of the risk is also national risk, national economic risk, and downgrades increases those risks. And so we had businesses leaving Barbados. I remember somebody saying that there was a business across from Woolworth. It sold hamburgers. I'm struggling to remember its name. Beefeater. I remember people saying that Beefeater went through all kinds of challenges, all kinds of economic hardships, but could not survive the Democratic Labour Party. Businesses were closing, and there was no pandemic. The increase in unemployment bears a relationship to criminal activity. The Democratic Labour Party presided over the near destruction of this economy, and so played a part in the increase in crime and violence in this country. The Barbados Labour Party came into office, and in spite of a pandemic, we see growth and we see significant decrease in unemployment. Mr. Speaker, that is what good governance looks like. That is what governance that recognizes relationship between the economic and the social, between the economic and the psychological. That is what a mature government looks like. That is what governance is all about. Mr. Speaker, the bill that we debate in this honorable chamber today is one of those policy interventions intended to address, and I was tempted to say arrest, but I'll say address, It is one of the policy interventions intended to address the matter of crime in this country. The Barbados Labour Party in government recognizes that a bail act cannot be the panacea. It cannot be all that is required. But, Mr. Speaker, there is no one policy intervention that will represent all that is required. The addressing of crime and criminal activity in a country requires an all-of-country approach, but it also requires multiple policy interventions. And I support this bill because it is a significant policy intervention. It is a needed policy intervention. I will not repeat all that you've heard already about those who commit crime, very serious crime, go out on bail and commit another one, and I don't want to rehash that. This Barbados Labour Party, in its approach to interventions to address the development of our society, and addressing crime is one component of addressing the development of a society. We recognize and are putting policies in place to address, for example, parental training. We recognize that that is important. The Honourable Member for St. Michael Southeast spoke to homes and households and the environment within which children are growing up. The Honourable Member for St. Philip West will likely tell you that what she has heard from teachers, I guess I hear it because I have spent almost all of my life in a house that had teachers in it. And many of them will tell you that you will get children to a certain point, and then there is school vacation, there's vacation, and when the children return to school, you wonder what happened over the 2 or 3 or 8 weeks. It seems as though all of it has been reversed. There is need for strengthening in the homes, the strengthening the capacity of parents. And while that may not ordinarily be seen as something that a government should get involved with, I'm not sure if intuitively it feels as though government should get involved with that. But this Barbados Labour Party government is not going to shy away from any intervention that we believe will help, both at the level of criminal activity, but also in developing our society more generally. We will get involved with any and every intervention that will assist. The matter of building capacity of third sector organizations. Third sector organizations have a role in this addressing of the issue. Many of them are already involved in addressing issues of building social capital and addressing matters that relate to violence and relate to criminal activity. We have been building that capacity. We've had many workshops since we've come to office, building these organizations, workshops on governance, seminars on proposal writing, on how to keep their accounts. And so we are building that capacity for third sector organizations. We recognize that third sector organizations are critical partners if we are going to be successful in addressing the matter of criminal activity and the resulting fear of crime. We've also been involved in building communities. We've been working to have communities come together to establish more groups. We have been encouraging older persons who've gone through the process, to come back to communities, to represent the seniors, to mentor young people, to be involved in cricket clubs like they used to be. All of these are things, Mr. Speaker, that we've been doing, both from the policy level, but also from our direct intervention as we speak to our constituents. We've had a number of youth interventions. I remember the honorable member for Christchurch West Central and the Building Blocks program. I've always remembered that, and those kinds of interventions are critical. And I also remember when he was the Minister of Youth, the Barbados Youth Advanced Corps, because we recognized that the youth service needed to be an evolution because society was changing, and the Barbados Youth Advanced Corps was developed. All of us were pleased as punch, as they say, when we saw them on Independence Day. The discipline, Mr. Speaker, the discipline that we saw, the uniformity, you could see and sense the impact of this program on the young people of this country. That is what this Barbados Labour Party in government has been doing. We've established the Job Start Plus program, and that Job Start Plus, we've engaged and we have now trained or exposed hundreds of young people between 16 and 24 to World of Work training. We've been able to place some of them in businesses so that they can get the 12 months experience that the program is intended to give them. All of these represent this government's understanding of intervening to make sure that we reduce the numbers who get into criminal activity. I also want to say to you, Mr. Speaker, this is a matter that all of us need to be involved with as it relates to addressing the problem. I spoke earlier about a whole of country approach, and I return to this only because I need to build on something the Honourable Member for St. Michael Southeast said. And I'm saying this through you, Mr. Speaker, to Barbadians. We've gotten to the point where many adults are scared to speak to children that they do not know. There's a reason for that. Many adults have been, as we would say in our parlance, cursed poisonously. Now, in more recent times, by the same children. But in the not too distant past, cursed poisonously by the parents of some of those children that some adults have tried to intervene with. And so there is a little bit of trepidation on the part of some adults to get involved, to say something. I have made a decision for me. I want to encourage others to make the same decision. We are going to have to look past the cussing and do what is our duty. When we see people going in the direction we believe is the wrong direction, we have to say something. We have, even if we get cussed, we still have to do it. We have to. We owe it, we owe it to our country. We owe it to those children. We have to intervene. It is our duty. I want to end, Mr. Speaker, saying a little bit about the role of faith in all of this. Part of my ministerial portfolio is religious affairs, ecclesiastical affairs. That is part of my ministerial portfolio. But it's also part of my personal portfolio, if I may use that term. Our Prime Minister, not too long ago, as she called for a weekend of prayer and reflection, and then for a pause on the Saturday, spoke to the fact that many of our young people are demonstrating a lack of grounding. Many of our young people are demonstrating that values have not been inculcated. In traditional Barbados, many of those values were inculcated in places of worship, places of prayer. I know you would know that, Mr. Speaker. I attended an exhibition yesterday evening, your denomination, and it was guided by your priest.
Reverend Ellis.
Exactly. A nice lady. I was trying to think of if I had something to complain to her about in terms of you, but nothing came to mind.
Honourable, is a good thing.
Yes.
It's a very good thing you found nothing.
I found nothing.
Because it might have served to your detriment when you come in this honourable
When I
chamber.
came, yes. You may have cut me by now.
That is correct.
Right.
I remember.
But the Honourable Prime Minister, the Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast, made a call for parents, and this is a call for parents, not a call to children, for parents to ensure that their children receive the grounding that some of them are the beneficiaries, some of those parents were the beneficiaries of. To send their children to places where they can get that grounding in good values. Sabbath school, Sunday school, meetings at mosques, wherever faith communities meet, we encourage parents, guardians, grandparents, allow your children to attend. Ensure that your children or grandchildren attend. That grounding will serve them in good stead. That grounding will also serve the wider community in good stead. There is a role for faith in addressing this matter. And so when the Prime Minister called for that weekend, it was not called whimsically. It was called understanding that Barbados' development over the years has been balanced, has been decent because of the role of faith, the role that faith-based organizations played in the development of this country. I will use this opportunity to call on the Ministry of Youth to consider partnering with faith-based organizations in relation to what happens during the summer vacation. We have inherited and continued, even though in a different form, these summer camps. I believe that there is room, much room, for a partnership between the Ministry of Youth and those who are responsible for camps and places of faith with respect to what is traditionally called Vacation Bible School. And I believe that small subventions, small amounts, given to those organizations to support the provision of snacks or workbooks would in my view, in my maybe biased view, I believe it will reap a greater reward than some of the summer camps. And I'm calling on the Ministry of Youth to partner with faith-based organizations to make sure that we can have vacation Bible schools that are not just for 1 week or 2 weeks, but that can last 6 or 7 or 8 weeks. Our children need grounding, and faith-based organizations are perfectly positioned to offer that grounding. that establishment of values. I also, the faith-based organizations have also volunteered, and I'm really calling because this is not taking too long. We want the Ministry of Education to accept the offer by leaders of faith-based organizations to assist with counseling. Our children need it. We do not have enough counselors in our schools to address all the needs. Our children have significant needs. Mr. Speaker, maybe a couple of years ago, had a conversation with my older daughter. Now she and her boyfriend have a NGO, Let's Unpack It, that speaks to mental health in terms of young people. And I said to her, maybe not really understanding maybe what I was saying. I said to her, well, when I was at school, I don't know that we had all these issues. But you know, she sat me down and talked me through a whole lot of stuff that caused me to understand that young people today are facing significant issues. And then she shares statistics that speak to suicides and suicidal ideation and a whole raft of things that suggest that our young people are, if they're not in crisis, are close to crisis. When we get offers of assistance, we have to do whatever is necessary. All these safeguards need to be put in place, but we need to put ourselves in a position where we can take advantage of the offer from faith-based organizations to assist in schools. As far as I'm aware, remains those leaders, those who are suitably qualified, and once they're vetted, are ready to assist. This country and our school system needs them. Mr. Speaker, Newton Lewis was a resident of Rose Hill. Newton Lewis was a member of the Barbados Police Service. He was a station sergeant. He was also a person of faith who actually led out in his congregation, sometimes in the whim. He died tragically, as I said at the beginning of my intervention. I've made this intervention in his name because, Mr. Speaker, Newton Lewis's life and his death attempting to foil criminal activity must not be in vain. I'm obliged to you.
Honourable Member for St. Philip West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, while bail, which is the crux of the matter being debated with this bail bill, while it relates directly to a person charged with a crime, particular type of crime using weapons, while this bill relates to that particular type of situation, the truth is that the matter of crime, it affects us all. It affects us in our homes, it affects us in our communities, it affects us at work, and sir, yes, it does affect us at school. And even, Mr. Speaker, when we are not the direct victim of a crime, or we're not in proximity to it. Proximity, sir, mean it didn't happen in our backyard. It didn't happen to someone close to us or someone we knew personally. Regardless, sir, it affects us all. It plays with our heads, sir. And it plays with our heads not just as individuals, but it plays with the psyche of a country where people people start to figure out what next, who next. Will it be me? How close will it get to me? And sir, the situation of crime in this country has certainly changed our culture, you know. It has changed our culture, sir. You will remember there was a time when you would stop and give somebody a lift. Either when the rain is falling or just because you knew them, you grew up with them, or even in the evening you're coming home. The situation of crime has changed that part of our culture where you think twice. There was a time somebody would give you a package and ask you to deliver it for someone and you wouldn't think twice. Nowadays, sir, you think twice. Or you say, don't give anything to me closed, open it up, let me see what is in it first. There is so many ways in which we have been affected as a country, psychologically, by crime, that it has changed our way in which we are kind to each other, the way in which we relate to each other. And we are slowly seeing people saying, what happened to this country? What we're really saying is that the social culture is beginning to change. And sir, I will say to you that this year, 2024, has been a killer year. You heard our Attorney General say earlier there are about 26 homicides in just this first part of the year already. And perhaps when we compare this number to some of our neighboring countries, some might say that is a drop in the bucket. But for Barbadians who are not accustomed to some of these numbers, it is really and truly a flood of death. And knowing, sir, that someone who was charged with a serious crime using particular types of weapons, that they're roaming freely among us, it certainly makes people feel unsafe and a little bit anxious. But sir, we are also seeing in our schools some brazen young people who, when they're confronted about their behavior as it relates to weapons, they just shrug it off. Sir, they shrug it off because the attitude is, nothing will happen to me. And sir, this morning, as I was speaking to some guidance counselors at our ministry's strategic planning retreat, some counselors, you know, they were telling me that this is a very real thing and it is growing in its intensity. They say many of our young people whom they are encountering are becoming emboldened, they're feeling powerful because their experience is seeing for themselves. Nobody's telling them, they're seeing for themselves. Family members, they're seeing their friends, they're seeing people who live in their neighborhood with whom they grew up. They're seeing them charged for doing a shooting or charged for killing someone. Of course, you're innocent till proven guilty. But they are seeing these people still walking about among them, going to buy a food, driving up in a decent ride, and still with some wads of money. In the minds of these young people, well, he or she went and did that, and nothing happened to them. So in their minds, nothing will happen to me. And they are becoming desensitized to serious consequences for serious behavior. That is what the guidance counselors, that is what the social workers are telling us is continuing to be an attitude that we cannot continue to support. Now, this bill, it not only speaks of the legal and the law related aspects as it relates to bail, it talks about the message that we are sending our young people about consequences. And sir, I will say to you that our children bring to school what they learn at home and in their communities. And what they're learning is not only coming from what they're being openly told, but what they're actually witnessing as people who are doing some dastardly deeds, or accused, I should say, accused of doing dastardly deeds with weapons, that they're coming out and there's no big deal. There's a wall of silence that I'm being told too, sir, that her guidance counselors and her social work, they're saying the wall of silence is something that those same students, particularly those confronted for behavioral challenges, when it comes to them bringing things into the school that they should not be bringing. Sir, I'm not going to repeat some of the things because this is a all family discussion. But I think you know, sir, some of the things that they're bringing into school that they ought not to be bringing into school, sir. And when asked a question about why that, where you got that from, who did this, that wall of silence is there, where they're not telling you who, for self-preservation. Because as you heard the member from St. Philip, from St. Michael, Southeast, I believe, say, snitches get stitches. And that is a culture that is also coming into the school. There is the revenge mentality, sir. There is no more walking away. Let us try to talk this out and work this through. It is you do me this, or you did my brother this out there. I will catch you when you get to school. And sir, it is a threat that is very real. And sir, as we look at what we are observing in our schools, right here in Barbados, what we are seeing is that there is a linkage between those students who are presenting with behavioral challenges. They are also, in many cases, the same students who are presenting with academic challenges. I wouldn't say one is a causal relationship, but I would say that they're definitely connected and correlated. And there are studies, sir, that speak to the fact that individuals with a higher quality of education are less likely to engage in criminal activity, which of course then lead to their having a need for bail. And that those same students, individuals with that higher quality of education, are more likely to secure stable employment and contribute positively to the society. So when our young people who are deprived of what they would consider to be a quality education, and what we would consider to be a quality education, when they are deprived of that opportunity, we should not be surprised that they become more susceptible to negative influences for criminal behavior, as they, of course, try to find means to cope with their circumstances and fill the void of lack of opportunity that is there when there's lack of education. May I say, Mr. Speaker, that the impact of education we have found is not just on the individual level, but all kinds of research have shown us that it also impacts at a community level. That when the level of education and the quality of that education is higher in certain communities, the crime rates in those communities tend to be lesser. And so Barbados, sir, in investing in education transformation, it is also a matter of not just us uplifting individuals and the futures of our communities. It is also has to be part of a strategy for us to reduce the risk of criminal behavior. Sir, you heard other members speak about the role of education in terms of helping us to manage the crime situation. Sir, I say that for too long we have allowed our education system to focus more on qualifications than on the quality of the person. And so part of what we are seeking to do with education transformation is not only, sir, prepare the children for the real world of jobs and of work, but for the real world of citizenship. That is, how do you behave as a contributing member of society? But also that we also prepare them for their social and emotional well-being, meaning that they're able to manage conflict, they know how to walk away or to negotiate their way out of a situation, that they can rise above the revenge culture that is developing. And our ministry has certainly sought to say that before they get to the point where they meet the justice system, we want to ensure that we are building up the resources in the schools through our student support services unit with additional school counselors, additional social workers, and we have certainly sought to do so. And I want to thank the member from St. Peter who has introduced us to a number of persons from the faith-based community who are willing to work alongside these increased numbers of counselors and social workers to provide the additional support, because we cannot have enough support for this increasing incidence of behavioral challenges that we are seeing in schools. And sir, I want through you to share that one of the things we were to do as a ministry was to make sure that we have agreed on the criteria for qualifying people to come into the school system to support us as counselors. Because we cannot just let in every and anybody who said, I am a counselor, but we have now settled on what that criteria to qualify them to do that should be. And so through you, the member from St. Peter should be hearing from us very shortly with regards to how do we move forward in that vein. And I think that as we do so, as we increase the level of support to our students in schools and to our teachers too, because we are finding that teachers who have had encounters with persons who are affiliated with some of those who may have received bail for various activities related to crime and accused of killing others, that when teachers have had to interact, they too have been scared. And so some of the counseling has not only been for the students, but for the teachers. We as a ministry have also been working with our welfare department, our child care department, and others to do what we can to provide additional support. We have been training our teachers in positive behavioral management. And this in 2023, and again this year in 2024, a number of students have been referred to the special program that we have for students who have presented with behavioral challenges. And our guidance counselors have said we need to work specifically with those. And so they are this year, many of them going through a special program. Sir, so often we hear about the boys. But what we are also seeing in our school are girls who are, in some cases, speaking as if they're in competition with the boys in terms of, I can do badness better than you. And so it is not just the boys that we are seeing that incidence of manifesting behavior that we know can be a gateway to other types of crime that can put people before the courts needing bail. But it is the girls. And the programs for boys and girls do not necessarily have to be the same program because they process in a very different way, some of them. And so we are continuing to put programs in place that don't only speak to what we can do with the young men, but also what needs to work for young women. Mr. Speaker, we can all look and say what is happening with crime in this country, and we can point to government and the courts and the police and any number of others who need to be a part of the solution that we need for criminal activity in this country. But sir, I wish through you to encourage us all to look at what is our own personal responsibility. We can always look at who else needs to do what. But sir, I know that my responsibility as a parent is to guide my child in the best way I can to keep her away from a life of crime. Sir, as part of the legislative arm of this government, my personal responsibility too is to work towards the passing of laws that will allow us to balance the rights of the individuals with that of what's in the best interest of the public. As a minister, in my ministry, part of my responsibility is to educate for opportunity, not just for qualifications, but in terms of building the quality of the person so that they can participate actively in the real world as we see it now, and constructively so. And as a Bajan, my personal responsibility, I see, sir, is that of if I see someone who I can say, come, that I have a responsibility to mentor and carry them along and show them a different way. I close, sir, by saying that nothing will happen with me cannot be only that in the minds of some of these young people who say nothing will happen with me because I see all these people coming out on bail after doing so many things, so I can do that too. We as a people don't have the luxury of saying nothing will happen with me, because should we permit this situation to continue and not be able to wrestle it to the ground, sir, something will happen with you and with me and with all the other yous and me's that are here in Barbados. And so I say, sir, personal responsibility, personal responsibility, personal responsibility. I thank you, sir, and I commend the Attorney General and those who have had an active part in bringing this bill to this honorable chamber. Thank you.
Honourable St. James South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to be able to join this debate to share some thoughts concerning what it is we need to do in order to wrestle to the ground this issue of crime. I also rise to give full support to this bill because I see it as part of the legislation that we're seeking to use to reset our legal framework for our republic in order to reduce this subculture of crime, which is being enacted with impunity. And sir, it has had an impact on our populations. I come from a constituency that tends to be older, seniors who live on their own. And so it is scary for them when there is a loophole that can allow people who've committed crime to be back on the street, and therefore open to committing more crimes. But for me, one of the more challenging and scarier aspects is the fact that there's some holes in our social framework, there's some holes in our legal framework that we need to plug if we're going to properly address this issue. And so today I am so pleased to be able to join hands with colleagues in support of the Attorney General and in support of this bill that will allow us to plug at least one of those holes today. Now, the history of our penal system, sir, is that it never was focused on helping to make the individual better. It really was about keeping that individual away from the society. It didn't matter what really happened to the person who committed the crime. And so eventually our penal system became a part of a manufacturing operation that helped to produce hardened criminals. These hardened criminals would return to the society and they would incubate new criminals. And so we found ourselves in a situation where we have to come with programs and interventions and laws that will help us to bring this to a halt. We cannot treat our penal system as just a place, a waste bin, where we put maladjusted persons. So we sweep them from the scene. They're never to be rehabilitated and never to be included in the vibrant life of this republic. And so, if we are going to bring change, it is necessary for us, just as we are modernizing our health system, modernizing our education system, we have to modernize our penal system and ensure that we are doing what is necessary for our legal system to help it to do what it needs to do, create opportunity for security and safety in the society, that people can get on with their lives. Now, one of the things I think that would be important for us if we are going to be able to change what is going on in our penal system is to appreciate the fact that when we send someone to prison, we cannot afford to do as we did in the past, to lag when it comes to building strong rehabilitation programs that would allow them to become more useful members of the society. By failing to do good rehabilitation, we render them unable to contribute meaningfully to their families, to their society, and to live a life that is able to bring them into some kind of life satisfaction. As a society, we've tended to be fairly punitive, and therefore we have tended to have this need to punish people forever. And what that does, when we create a situation where when a person comes out from prison, they cannot get reintegrated, what we do is engender a sense of desperation, which will help feed that recidivism. And that is not smart on our part. And why is it not smart? When we hold people in a holding pen forever, punishing them for that crime, we fail to acknowledge all the other impacts that emerge because of this person having committed a crime and being put in prison. I've heard stories of children whose parent, particularly their father, was sent to prison for a crime he committed. And the child started presenting in the school self-harming because the child could not cope with the challenge of having a parent being in jail and not being able to cope with all that that meant. And so the child was self-harming. On another occasion, there were children who, living that life, being in a family where crime and criminal behavior is normal, that children then feel that this is a part of how we behave in the society, and as was so ably shared by the Honourable Member for St. Philip West. Children then feel that this is what they are allowed to do. Teachers shared with me an incident where when they were speaking with and dealing with the child became angry and threatened that their father will come back to the school with his gun and deal with the teacher. Now imagine teachers living under that kind or working under that type of threat, that someone will come back, a parent will come back with a gun. And then there are the other issues that emerge when people become desperate or people begin to accept crime as a way of life. We've heard where people commit petty crimes, especially, Mr. Speaker, around Christmas time. They want to go back up into prison because at least they could look forward to the 3 or 4 square meals a day, because they're finding it really hard, a real struggle on the outside to cope. And so there are all these impacts and effects that occur when we are not dealing with our legal system and our penal system in such a way as to ensure that we are helping people to return to a good and normal life by helping them with their rehabilitation. And the Bible leads the way in showing us how do you deal with people who violate the societal norms and rules. It says, let him that stole steal no more, but rather let them labor with their hands to produce the things which are good. If we had to interpret that scripture says that rehabilitation has to be the way in which we deal with crime. And therefore, this will help us to be able to restore people to good citizenship and good citizenship behaviors. In Australia, they have taken a very strong position that incarceration cannot only be about punishment. What they have done is that they have started to focus on rehabilitation as the reason why you are incarcerated. And so they've put in place a number of programs focused on helping the prisoner to readjust, coaching, counseling, providing skills training. These are the things that they have sought to do so that what emerges at the end of a prison sentence is a better person, a stronger person, a person who can fit better into the society. And so for us here in Barbados, not only have we put at the level of primary and secondary school the Education Transformation Program and the supports that were outlined by the Honourable Member for St. Philip West, what we have sought to do at the tertiary level, we have sought to reach out to those who fell through the cracks of the old educational system and sought to establish a pathway by which they can re-engage their lives and live successfully. And this is going to be necessary for those who have been incarcerated. So what we've looked at is the need for remedial education. One of the statistics shared with us demonstrates that many of the persons who end up in prison are often challenged with their literacy and numeracy skills. Many of them may suffer from dyslexia, and therefore making available to the prison system some of those services which we have in the educational system to assist them with remedial learning, to assist them with special needs, will go a long way in helping us to rehabilitate those who have run up against the law. Along with that, I would want to recommend that we look at offering civic and social skills training, personality and skills development programs, conflict resolution, anger management, negotiation skills, and importantly, coaching and counseling to help with healing the emotional wounds, the traumas that they've experienced in their lives, so that we can help them reposition themselves in the society and reposition themselves to be useful people in our Barbados. Now, the job of tackling crime is not, as was said earlier by a number of speakers, is not the purview of one sector of this community. It is a whole of country approach. It is going to require everyone, whether it is business, family, the church, NGOs, the government in all its various forms. This is going to be absolutely necessary, but it is not scattershotting. It's not each one of them doing their own thing, but rather what we need is a national plan, and each one can see what is the role that they can play, and we can rationalize resources, rationalize our plans, so that we are able to target the full force of the energy of the community to help us deal with the issue of crime. And Barbadians get it. Barbadians understand this. When we had the increase in crimes just these last few weeks, When you listen to the call-in programs, Barbadians demonstrated that they understand that this has to be addressed, and it's not just simply a police matter. This is a matter that all of us have to work on. And I want to salute them for that. Our private sector has also understood this. To their credit, they've recognized that they need to play a role. I was happy to hear the head of the Barbados private sector say on the media that they recognize that they have a role to play, and they've said to government, we are interested in working with you. Tell us what you need us to do. How can we support a program that will help us to tackle crime? And I was pleased to hear this, because two of the suggestions that were put was, do you need us to help with jobs? Do you need us to help with internships? Do you help us need with sponsorships? They listed a number of things. And I was pleased about that, because in the tertiary system, one of the challenges we have in giving people practical experience and shaping them to make them fit to work in enterprises, to get a job and then keep the job, our problem has been getting opportunities for apprenticeship and internships that would allow them to be mentored in a work situation and that would allow them to become successful in a career. And this is going to be important. I want to encourage them to have those conversations with government, that we can look at what it is we need to do in order to be able to provide a pathway for people to be successful. The reason why I felt that it was important for the private sector to recognize the importance of playing their role is because crime affects them, and it affects them in a number of ways. When people retreat to their homes and don't go and avoid mixing, then there's no spending, so consumption drops. When you have travel advisories, it impacts our tourism earnings. It impacts our investment attractiveness. But the continued growth of crime and the attitudes that fuel crime will contaminate your labor force. Eventually, your workplace will become difficult to manage as people with attitudes that do not conform to the values of our society then begin to manifest in the workplace. And that has already started to happen. And supervisors and managers have expressed concern, well, what quality of person are you putting out that we now we're dipping from a pool that is experiencing some level of contamination? And so this requires that we all work together, and I want to salute the private sector for so doing. What we are seeking to do in the tertiary education program, some time ago, there was an effort to start CVQs and MVQs in the prison, but it never really got off the ground. The program actually went into abeyance, and they never really got it going. What we've done this year, we've spoken with the various players at the tertiary level and said to them, look, we need to start putting together a program that would allow us to look at the possibility of certifying the technical training that is being offered at the prison, see how we could create certification around it, but then more importantly, as people are leaving prison, encouraging them to come to the tertiary education institutions, to BVTB, to SJPI, etc., to be able to acquire more certification that they can fit in to Barbados and have the opportunity to work or create their own job. And one of the things that I want to highlight that I think is an excellent example of what can be done in terms of rehabilitation. A number of ex-convicts coming out of prison finding themselves unable to get work, unable to provide for their families, but not wanting to go back to crime, decided to come together to start to learn about entrepreneurship. And so they had approached the Ministry of Energy and Business, and the co-op group worked with them to help form the Association of Reform-Minded Enterprises. And there's about 20 persons who are members of this. But this co-op is a co-op with a difference. It not only provides people with the opportunity to learn about entrepreneurship and to start a business, but they provide emotional support, coaching and counseling for the members so they do not feel alone. They feel that they're part of a family that is working together with them to help them to overcome the challenges that they've experienced because they do not wish to go back to crime. And I want to salute that Association of Reform-Minded Enterprises and the diligent work that is being done by its members. I also want to salute the ministry for working with them. They actually were able to find resources, sir, to be able to purchase a truck. And what they wanted to do with the truck was to get involved in the construction opportunities that were available. And so they've been able to get some. And as a result, the truck is able to pay for itself. So that type of success will help them to encourage other former inmates to recognize, yes, there is a way out, there is a way to get help, because they do not want to find themselves back in prison. And so this is important. I really want to salute them. Now, we said that all the players have to find a role to play in terms of handling and managing crime. And I shared about the private sector. But we also have a role to play for people to volunteer. And I believe the Honourable Member for St. Peter shared what was being done in terms of the NGOs and encouraging them to work in communities. In the Ministry of Education, we have the Give Back program. And that Give Back program allows students to volunteer to work with many NGOs across the country. And one such NGO is the Prison Fellowship. This works in the prisons, working with people who are incarcerated, but they also work with the families of inmates. And this is important work, and they need not only human resources, they need financial resources that they can actually broaden their work. And this is going to help us to do better at our rehabilitation by getting people to volunteer to work through the Give Back program in programs that help the young people, help inmates, etc. And I want to salute the work that they too are doing. Barbadians are stepping up to the plate. In addition to this, the need for parenting programs is very important. And I would want to congratulate the Honourable Attorney General's Chambers and the Honourable Member for the City, who have put in the Peace program funds to help with parenting in the community. Many parents are overwhelmed. Many parents are unparented themselves and therefore find it difficult to manage their children. And so the parenting program is something that I believe will give the necessary support so that we can stop that pipeline to crime. I'm happy to say that even this evening, in St. James South, we have a program that is on, and I will join them as soon as we're finished here. And the parents have expressed not only excitement and engagement in learning, but they're eager to continue this journey of parenting. And I believe that if we can do even more of this across the country, this will help. Now, in terms of the everyday citizen, the Honourable Member for St. Peter mentioned that there's not only the fear, there's not only the crime that people are afraid of, there's also the fact that people are under stress because of the fear of crime. Someone may not break into your house, but if you are constantly thinking that around you is unsafe, every noise you hear, especially if you live alone, you will find yourself every day living with that level of stress, of the fear of crime. And this is palpable in my constituency because I have so many older people. And therefore, that fear and nervousness is there. And that is not what you want for your population because it affects their everyday quality of life. It affects their health. So what can citizens do? Citizens can play a part as well. And this is where the Neighborhood Watch programs help to create a greater sense of safety and help to create a sense of empowerment. When neighbors get together and they're looking out for each other, if you know someone is out there looking out and you are part of a group that is seeking to protect your community, it will help to reduce your fear of crime because you know that there is alertness. At the moment in St. James South, I felt that it was very important that we do this. And we have 23 such groups already formed. By the time we're finished, we'll probably be at 35. But already I'm beginning to see the social impact of neighbors getting to know each other, sharing, looking out for crime, communicating with the police, and making sure that around them is safe and helping all of them to feel safer. And what I want to do is to encourage more people to join and become members, because this is part of how you help contribute to this fight in terms of crime. Now, sir, creating a Bail Act that balances the needs of the individual who has committed a crime or is alleged to have committed a crime and the needs of citizens is not an easy thing. But today in this chamber, as was laid out by the Honourable member for St. Joseph and the Honourable member for Christchurch East, we are able to recognize that that piece of legislation that we are going to vote on here is something that can make a difference to how we are able to deal with the matter of bail. And I want to congratulate them for the hard work. I want to tell them that they have my full support. And I can tell them also that they have the full support of the people of St. James South, because they want to see something done about the fact that people are able to get back out on the streets having committed heinous crimes and go out on bail and are able to commit more if they so choose. And so we just want to express our thanks and our full support towards the Bail Act. I'm obliged to you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the suspension of the House until 6 p.m.
The question is that this honourable chamber be suspended until 6 p.m. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This honourable chamber stands suspended until 6 p.m.